Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to answer the age-old question, grifter or gifted. Today, we're going to dive into the world of Dan Bilzerian,
Okay.
a man who has built an empire on Instagram fame, high-stakes poker, and some pretty controversial business ventures.
Yeah, Dan Bilzerian, he's a fascinating case study, isn't he? He's cultivated this image of, a self-made millionaire,
Right.
this poker prodigy who kind of lives life on his own terms. But then when you start to peel back the layers, the Instagram filters, and the carefully curated PR, you start to see a much more complex and honestly a little bit troubling picture.
Yeah, he's got millions of followers, right,
Mm.
who just eat up this lavish lifestyle. The
Yeah.
private jets, the parties, the endless, parade of women.
Oh, yeah.
But there's this growing chorus of critics who say it's all a facade.
Right.
A carefully constructed illusion designed to hide some pretty shady dealings.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a mountain of sources to sift through today. We've got articles, social media posts, legal documents. We even got our hands on a few leaked emails.
Oh, juicy.
Our mission today is to try to separate fact from fiction
Okay.
and see if we can finally answer that burning question. Is Dan Bilzerian a visionary entrepreneur who's kind of beaten the system?
Yeah.
Or a master manipulator who's built his fortune on smoke and mirrors?
Let's start with the foundation of his supposed empire.
Okay.
His wealth.
All right.
So Dan claims to have made millions playing poker, specifically in these exclusive high-stakes private games.
Okay.
He's even boasted about winning $50 million in a single year. But these figures have never been independently verified, and that's kind of where the first cracks in his narrative begin to appear.
So are we saying that he's bluffing about his poker winnings?
Not necessarily, but, there's a lot of skepticism
Yeah.
surrounding those claims. Some sources, like Market Realist, for example, suggest that a significant portion of his wealth might actually come from a much more controversial source.
Okay.
His father, Paul Bilzerian.
Now, his father's name definitely rings a bell. Didn't he have some serious legal troubles?
He did. Paul Bilzerian is actually a convicted felon who served time for financial crimes.
Wow.
Back in the 80s, he was charged with stock manipulation and fraud.
Oh, wow.
He was even ordered to pay a massive $62 million fine to the SEC. But get this, only a fraction of that money was ever recovered.
Okay, so we're talking about a family history that is steep in financial controversy.
Yeah.
But how does that connect to Dan's current wealth?
Well, there's a theory that Paul, being the savvy businessman that he was, might have stashed away millions in hidden assets. Offshore accounts, trusts, you name it. And who better to benefit from those hidden funds than his two sons,
Right.
Dan and Adam?
So even if we take Dan's poker winnings at face value, his lavish lifestyle could be fueled, at least in part, by money that was essentially stolen from investors decades ago.
Potentially, yeah.
Talk about a complicated inheritance.
It definitely adds a whole new dimension to the self-made millionaire image, doesn't it? And this is all crucial context when we start examining Dan's later business ventures, particularly his company, Ignite International Brands Ltd.
Ah, Ignite.
Yeah.
That's the company behind all those flashy ads for e-cigarettes, CBD oil, vodka. They even had a line of premium water, right?
They did, yeah.
I remember when Ignite went public back in 2019. There was a lot of hype.
Yeah.
But didn't the stock price kind of take a nosedive soon after?
It did. And that's where the allegations of fraud really start to heat up.
Okay.
According to reporting from Poker News, the SEC filed charges against Ignite, Dan, and other executives in 2022, alleging a pretty elaborate scheme to falsify financial records and mislead investors.
So hold on. We've got potential financial misconduct, possibly tied to family money with a questionable past, and now we're adding possible corporate fraud to the mix.
Yeah.
This is starting to look less like gifted and more like grifter, wouldn't you say?
The evidence is certainly piling up, but remember, we're still in the investigation phase. What's fascinating here is the SEC uncovered a pretty damning email from Dan to Ignite executives. It seems like he was trying to install a new team, specifically someone named Eddie as VP of Finance, and giving very specific instructions on hiring 4 more people, all without official officer positions.
Okay, so why is this email so significant? Was he just trying to, shake things up at the company?
The SEC suggests it's more than that.
Okay.
They believe this email, along with other evidence, points to Dan's father, Paul, pulling the strings behind the scenes at Ignite.
Okay.
Remember, Paul officially has no role in the company.
Right.
But this email hints that he might have been calling the shots all along.
Wow.
Despite his history of financial crimes.
So this is getting very interesting.
And that $50 million poker-winning claim? Well, Ignite's former president, Curtis Heffernan, who later sued Dan for wrongful termination, claimed that some of that poker money might have actually been Ignite's funds, funneled through to create the illusion of Dan's personal wealth.
Whoa, wait a minute. So we could be looking at a situation where Dan's father, a convicted financial criminal, is potentially orchestrating a scheme to inflate Ignite's value.
Yeah.
While simultaneously using company funds to bolster his son's image as, like, a high-rolling poker player.
It's a possibility.
This is starting to sound like a Hollywood movie plot.
It's a pretty wild story, that's for sure. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even touched on Dan's controversial personal life, his legal battles, or the inflammatory statements that have gotten him labeled as anti-Semitic.
Right.
Those are all pieces of the puzzle we'll need to examine to get a clearer picture of who Dan Bilzerian really is.
Well, it sounds like we've got a lot more digging to do.
We do.
We're just getting started on this deep dive, folks. Stay tuned, because we're about to unravel a whole lot more. Welcome back to the deep dive, where we're trying to unravel the enigma that is Dan Bilzerian. Before the break, we were looking into the origins of his wealth and that whole controversy with his company, Ignite. But, you know, his controversies don't stop at finances. His personal life, his public statements have also generated a ton of heat.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's really built this persona around pushing boundaries, flouting convention, but, you know, sometimes those actions cross the line.
Yeah.
From bad boy antics to behavior that's, you know, actually harmful. Like, for example, he was banned from a Miami nightclub for kicking a woman in the face.
Right.
And he was later sued by the adult film actress Janice Griffith for injuries that she sustained during a photo shoot.
Yeah, and there was even an arrest on bomb-making charges, right?
Right, there was. Back in 2014, he was arrested at LAX, but the charges were eventually dropped.
Okay.
And then there's the lawsuit from Curtis Heffernan, Ignite's former president, who claimed he was fired for criticizing Dan's use of company funds for personal expenses.
So, like, he was using company money to fund his lifestyle.
Yeah, basically. He alleged that Dan was treating Ignite's coffers like his personal piggy bank, blurring the lines between business expenses and his, you know, extravagant lifestyle.
So are we talking about a few lavish parties here, or is it something more serious?
According to Heffernan, it was way more than a few parties. We're talking potentially millions of dollars. Remember those poker winnings that Dan bragged about?
Yeah.
Well, Heffernan suggested that some of that money might have actually been Ignite's funds.
Oh, wow.
Funneled through to create this illusion of personal wealth. It's a pretty serious accusation.
It is.
And it raises even more questions about Dan's financial dealings.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to think that someone with so much money, whether earned or inherited, would allegedly resort to, like, these kinds of schemes. But perhaps even more disturbing than the financial allegations are Dan's inflammatory statements, particularly those targeting Jewish people.
Right. This is where his King of Controversy title takes a much darker turn.
Oh.
In recent years, he's made numerous anti-Semitic remarks both on social media and in interviews. According to the Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, he's even gone so far as to deny the Holocaust, calling it Israeli propaganda.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop there. He's also shared conspiracy theories about Jewish control of banks and governments, tapping into age-old tropes that have fueled anti-Semitism for centuries.
It's shocking that someone with his platform would spread such dangerous misinformation and hateful rhetoric. It makes you wonder what his true motivations are. Is he genuinely anti-Semitic, or is this just another calculated attempt to shock and provoke to stay relevant in the ever-churning news cycle?
It's a question that's been debated by many. Some argue that it's all part of his brand, a way to generate controversy, keep people talking. Others believe it reflects deeper, more troubling beliefs. Whatever the motivation, the impact is undeniable. Spreading hate speech, especially to an audience of millions, has real-world consequences. It normalizes prejudice and contributes to a climate of intolerance and potentially even violence.
And how has Dan responded to the backlash against these statements? Has he addressed them at all?
Here's where things get even more interesting. According to the Scottish Sun, Dan has gone silent.
Really?
He stepped back from social media. His last Instagram update was in August of this year.
Wow.
And his current whereabouts are unknown.
So he's gone completely off the grid. That's a pretty drastic move for someone who built his empire on being constantly in the public eye.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions. Is this like a strategic retreat, a way to lay low while the legal and public scrutiny intensifies?
Right.
Or has he genuinely had a change of heart, a moment of self-reflection that's led him to reevaluate his actions and the impact of his words?
It's hard to say for sure. But his silence definitely speaks volumes. It's a stark contrast to his previous persona, the one that thrived on attention and provocation.
Exactly, and let's not forget that the SEC and DOJ investigations are ongoing. The legal pressure is mounting, and that could certainly be a factor in his decision to withdraw from the public eye.
Right, the walls seem to be closing in. So let's get back to that central question. Is Dan Bilzerian a grifter or gifted?
Right.
We've examined his claims of wealth, his controversial business ventures, his legal troubles, his inflammatory statements. What's the verdict?
It's a tough call. I mean, he's undeniably a master of self-promotion, a savvy marketer who understands the power of social media and the allure of a lavish lifestyle. But the evidence we've examined paints a troubling picture.
Yeah.
It seems like his carefully constructed persona might be hiding a much darker reality.
Yeah.
One built on alleged financial misdeeds, a disregard for ethical boundaries, and a willingness to exploit others for personal gain. So is he a product of a culture that rewards wealth and fame above all else? Or is he actively manipulating that culture for his own benefit?
It's probably a bit of both. He's both a symptom and a perpetrator of a system that often values style over substance.
Right.
Where controversy can be a currency, and where the pursuit of wealth and fame can sometimes eclipse basic principles of decency and integrity.
Yeah. It's a sobering reminder that we need to be critical thinkers, to look beyond the surface and examine the actions, the impact, and the motivations of those who claim to be changing the world. Because sometimes the most dazzling facades conceal the darkest truths.
Well said. And that brings us to another crucial question. What does the future hold for Dan Bilzerian?
Right. He's facing serious legal challenges, his reputation is tarnished, and he's vanished from the digital playground that made him famous. Where does he go from here?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we've been trying to really figure out Dan Bilzerian. We've spent this episode going through his claims of, making all this controversies with his company, Ignite, all those legal troubles.
So now the question is, what's next for this self-proclaimed king of Instagram?
Well, the SEC, they're seeking what's called permanent injunctive relief.
Okay.
Which basically means they want to legally bar him from holding any leadership positions in public companies.
Oh, wow.
So it's like the corporate equivalent of a timeout.
Right.
And it would be a huge blow to his business ambitions, obviously.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we can't forget those criminal charges, right? I mean, things could get a lot worse if he's actually convicted.
Absolutely. The U.S. Attorney's Office, they're pursuing criminal charges against Dan, his father, Paul, and Ignite's former CFO, Curtis Ralder. If they're found guilty, they could be facing some serious jail time.
Yeah.
Looks like Dan's high-stakes gamble might finally be catching up to him.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that fame and fortune don't put you above the law. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what stands out to you the most about Dan Bilzerian's story?
I think for me, it's the stark contrast between the image he's so carefully cultivated and the allegations of fraud, the manipulation, the prejudice that have come to light.
Yeah.
It really raises a fundamental question. In a world where charisma and controversy, they kind of collide so often.
Right.
How can we really tell a true visionary from a skilled con artist?
It's a question we grapple with all the time.
Okay.
Especially now, in the age of social media, where everything's about these curated personas and these, carefully constructed narratives. It's easy to get seduced by the allure of wealth, by fame, by the illusion of a perfect life. But as we've seen with Dan Bilzerian, the reality behind the facade can be very, very different. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can we learn from this kind of cautionary tale?
I think there are a few key things to remember.
Right.
First, be a critical thinker.
Right.
Don't just accept everything you see at face value, especially on social media. Dig deeper, look for inconsistencies, and really question the motives of those who seem too good to be true.
That's great advice. What else?
Second, hold people accountable, especially those in positions of power. Wealth and fame shouldn't shield anyone from responsibility for their actions. And finally, remember that true fulfillment True happiness, it comes from something much more meaningful than just material possessions or, fleeting fame.
Yeah.
It's about pursuing your passions, building genuine connections, and contributing to something larger than yourself.
Couldn't said it better myself. Dan Bilzerian's story is a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping a culture that values integrity, accountability, and genuine connection over fleeting fame and fortune. So as we conclude this deep dive, we encourage you to think critically about the influencers you follow, the brands you support, and the values you prioritize. Because ultimately, it's not about judging Dan Bilzerian. It's about asking ourselves how we can create a world where substance triumphs over style and integrity trumps the allure of the con.